Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh, and welcome to Mental Health Matters, a show that openly talks about mental health. My name is Harpal Singh, I'm your host for the show, and today we've got a very, very important topic that we can talk about: domestic abuse and domestic violence, and how this affects individuals in the community. And I've got some expert guests in our presence today who are going to be talking and giving us expert opinion and advice about the field of mental health and domestic abuse. I'm going to start off by introducing Seema, Dhanak, a mental health crisis manager, leading trainer on domestic abuse and domestic violence. So, Seema, welcome to our show.
Thank you.
Alongside that, we've got Rita Sharma, a women empowerment ambassador, humanitarian educator, the founder and CEO of Kushali UK, an organisation that's dedicated to empower women in the field of mental health and domestic abuse.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Okay. And once again, we've got my brother here, Kuldeep Baji from Journey of Compassion, expert in the understanding of and the words of wisdom. So, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. So today we're talking about domestic abuse and domestic violence. Domestic abuse and domestic violence, big words. Seema, what is domestic abuse and what is domestic violence?
Well, it's been categorised legally by the Domestic Abuse Act by physical, emotional, psychological, sexual abuse and economic abuse. However, I feel within our Asian communities that also extends out to areas such as modern slavery and human trafficking. It also extends out to honour-based violence and forced marriage. So I think it's important that we actually do think about the subject quite holistically and very specifically to our communities.
And coming to you, Rita, Kushali UK works quite a lot with domestic abuse victims. And how is it for you? How these people get to seek your support?
So it's primarily through word of mouth that people hear about our services, and then they reach out to us, and then we will do everything we can possibly, whatever extent it is, to support them, help them, and then get them on their way, basically.
So within the Punjabi community, does domestic violence exist?
Oh, dear me. Is that a real question?
That's a
Harpal
question.
Singh ji? Domestic abuse exists so much in our culture, in our community, that it's not seen as abuse, unfortunately. And I say it from my personal as well as professional experience that domestic abuse is so common, we might as well call it tomato ketchup. It's so inbuilt in the system, in the social system, in the family systems, in the social setups, in the whole hierarchy thing, that it would be a rare occasion where you see a family totally devoid of existence of domestic abuse. It's a very touchy subject, obviously, and it's very close to my heart, being a survivor of domestic abuse and have lived that life for very many years, including honour-based abuse, which is also a form of domestic abuse. And it is obviously soul-destroying. Individuals who go through experiences like this fail for very, very long time to understand that it is actually abuse. And that included myself as an educated, vocal, very socially aware woman. I did not call it domestic abuse until I was out of it. I had written a book about it. I had started my work about it, but I would not call my personal experience as domestic abuse because there's so much shame and guilt and pain and so many negative connotations attached. Of course, it's negative, but also how it's perceived by the people around us. We are scared to call it out. So your question startles me, Harpal Singh ji. Does it exist in our communities? The answer, unfortunately, is a big fat yes.
It's interesting how you said that you only realised it until you came out of it. And I'm just going back to Seema about the cultural norms and the understandings of probably predominantly within the Punjabi community that and the impact of domestic abuse and domestic violence has. And especially addressing the norms. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the biggest dangers of normalising domestic abuse within our communities is then the difficulty and the barriers that that poses to individuals. And we need to acknowledge that domestic abuse happens to men and women, more so women than it does to men. But the cultural aspects and normalizing the abuse puts a challenge in place for those individuals to seek out help from professionals. And in my sort of 20 years of working with victims of abuse, especially from our Punjabi communities and from other Asian communities as well, the biggest factor that I see that holds people back in abusive relationships is the cultural stigma of publicizing the fact that they are victims of abuse. And it's perceived that the moment you seek help from a professional authority, such as the council, such as the police, it then becomes public knowledge that this individual is now a victim of domestic violence. And then there is also the fear of other services, such as social services, being involved. There is this instant fear that if there are children involved and social services are involved too, that their children will be taken off them. So, there are so many factors, apart from, the usual log kya kahenge and all of that, issues that we have in our communities. There is a very, very huge amount of fear that individuals hold when it comes to seeking out help. It's interesting that Ritu spoke about the fact that she didn't realize that she was in an abusive relationship until she came out, which is also a common factor that I see with the service users that I work with. And one of the other challenges is understanding on both a personal and professional level when someone is actually a victim of domestic abuse. And one of the things that I say in my training courses is that quite often a person suffering domestic abuse will not know the terminology behind, okay, this is psychological abuse or this is economic abuse. What they will know is their story and what they're experiencing. But it's up to the professional to be able to pick out from that storytelling that actually, okay, this individual has told me their story, and based on that, this person is experiencing these different types of abuse. But actually, what I have found is when I've done assessments with individuals experiencing domestic abuse, like Ritu says, it's been so normalized that actually I have to ask the question often 3 or 4 times as to whether or not they've suffered physical abuse before they actually admit that, yes, there was physical abuse and other types of abuse present in the relationship.
Well, Jibali, it's interesting hearing from both Ritu's and Seema's perspective of going through either through a professional setting or through personal setting or domestic abuse and how it's affecting the Punjabi community. Just wanted to get your thoughts.
I'd like to look at it from a perspective of how people often interpret the script, Gurbani, or like a misinterpretation and a misunderstanding, which often makes people think or feel that they need to continue remaining in that situation and continue to endure. There's a reason for why I'm using that word, endure, whatever is going on with them, and that comes from a lack of understanding, not their fault. So from my experience when I've traveled and I've done talks and then people come and speak to me, one of the things that I commonly start to hear is that few women approached me and said, well, for me to be able to live up to these certain qualities or virtues, and those virtues often that I spoke about from a spiritual realm are nimarta, so to be humble, live in humility, and then you have qualities like to be able to have that sahanshilta, that shakti to sahan, to endure, and then about acceptance. So these 3 are the most misunderstood and interpreted qualities to have when you're living a spiritual life, or then they interpret that in a cultural setting to say, well, and I literally had somebody come up to me and say, is this what it means to live in nimarta, to live in humility spiritually? And this person very passively said, so do I just continue to endure when I'm being hit? And I was not expecting that. So I just took a breath and I was like, it 100% does not mean that. And I think so, because we're here on Sangat TV and I'm here to give that perspective of the wisdom, is to clarify and demystify what these qualities are. If we just looked at endurance, to endure something, remember, to endure something doesn't mean to endure abuse, but it means to be strong enough to, and then if we interlink that with acceptance means spiritually, I cannot now avoid what this moment of life is, just this moment. That doesn't mean to be inactive. So it's actually acknowledging, oh wow, this is happening with me right now. Acceptance is acknowledging something for the reality that it is. So it's coming to understand this is the reality, wow, this is what's happening. And acceptance doesn't mean to be inactive. It actually means for you to be able to take action from a clear space of understanding, wow, this is actually happening to me. So I need to take a step. So acceptance actually allows us to take a better possible step in life. And endurance could mean that you're going to endure that step that you are taking. Sorry, can you use your name?
Seema.
Yeah, so like Seema said, obviously there's a lot of fear to, well, what's going to happen with the kids? How is this going to go financially? Am I in a position to take this step? So it's more about looking at those forward steps. Yes, that I'm going to be strong enough to endure those steps, not the abuse that is coming at me. Nimrata means that to be humble, it means that I'm in a very powerful position, not in a weak position. Because Nimrata means that I don't feel that I'm superior to anyone. Neither do I feel that I'm inferior to anyone. I'm actually in a space where I want to do the best and make this world a better place. Allowing somebody to continue doing that isn't making this world a better place. And allowing that to continue happening to you isn't continuing to make this world into a better place. So what you're actually saying is, I want to be in a position where I can lift others. So if that person is willing to work on shifting their behaviors, great. If they're not, then you have to obviously make those difficult choices of what direction you're going to go next. So Nimrata is actually just being humble in a perspective of being in a powerful position to say that I'm going to do the best possible thing, whether that be for others and for myself.
To coming back to you, hearing what Rajiv said, and quite beautifully put in terms of Nimrata, Sancha, there's other words that come along as well, like Izzat. I want to touch on you, what's the mirror images of both what's been said in scriptures, what's been said in our religion, compared to what's been said in our community, in our culture.
Yeah. What I come to understand, Harpalji, is that women, and I am going to insist women, in Asian cultures, and I speak of home, Punjabi culture, they are controlled using the word izzat, abru. And unfortunately, there are very number of practices which shouldn't be classed as honor-based practices, but they are. And that's to do with control more than anything else. What Punjabi communities would do, at least my generation, I've seen loads of women go through this, where they were educated, they were sent to the best schools, colleges, universities, they should have a degree, they may have a career if the family permits, but then they're not allowed to have a mind of their own. So when they're outside, they are CEOs and they are directors and they're in leadership positions and they're good with that. But when they come home, they should leave their intellect at the coat hanger along with the bag and their coat, walk in just as a woman. Now that's quite mentally disturbing in itself. If you look at the dynamics of it, that's kind of split personality being practiced. So a woman who's making important decisions, possibly for other people's lives as well, outside the house, at work, is not allowed to have a say of her own life or her children's lives when she comes back.
Seema, coming to you from a professional perspective, you've heard from Victor from a cultural perspective, you've heard from Baljeet from a religious perspective. As someone who's probably not privy to both ends, what's your take on this?
So I think coming in from a professional perspective, I feel some of the things that Baljeet has just said about the endurance and, you know, the endurance of the journey of actually being free from domestic abuse. And what does Sikhi say about being, you know, in that journey, being present and acknowledging that the abuse does exist? And I feel that, you know, on both parts, on the perpetrator part as well as the person experiencing the abuse, those two aspects are so key. And actually, I do have a belief, optimistically, that if those two perspectives are adopted correctly, that there is room for change, and that actually perpetrator work can be done, victim rehabilitation work can be done. But I feel that it requires an openness from both individuals to be able to do that. Then going on to what Rituji has just spoken about, the way in which women are treated within our communities as well. And I have to second that. You know, as a woman, I've experienced these things too, that, you know, there is an expectation that you would tick certain boxes within the family of, you know, your expectations, your roles, you know, in terms of how you look after your family, having an opinion on something, having a say. And actually, there is still very much prevalent in our communities this whole thing about patriarchal family systems. And unfortunately, that can't be eradicated with just women speaking up about domestic abuse, which is why we need individuals like yourself and the GG to get involved as men and actually sort of work towards seeing the harmful practices within patriarchy. I also want to touch briefly on the honour-based violence side of things again, just to acknowledge and be clear that all of the parts of domestic abuse that we discussed earlier, the physical, the economic abuse, the control and coercive behaviour, psychological, etc., that still exists even in honour-based violence cases. The reality is that honour-based violence is not a unique, separate type of abuse. It's the motive behind all of those other abuses taking place in the home. So the control, the psychological, the physical, the motive behind all of those abuses being carried out within our Asian families in particular is honour.
Did you coming back to a lot of women will use your services and probably Seema to come to see you? How easy is it to access, and what steps would women or victims take to come out of a domestic violence?
The biggest favour a woman can do herself is to first of all accept that she's in this situation. Like Baljeet said a minute ago, that, you know, accepting that this is not what I want to endure anymore. This is not how I want my life to continue. So the biggest favour a woman can do is to realise and accept that this is it. And of course, it's lots of layers to it, Harpalji, because if children are involved, it's really difficult. Families are always involved in situations like this, and women generically will not get the support they should do from families, because there's such a big concept about izzat around divorce and separation. And of course, the mental health gets impacted. Once they know that this is not what they want and they're ready to step out, there are loads of different organisations, including ours, Kushala UK, that's ready to support victims. And there is mental health support through these organisations for victims of domestic abuse. There is support for children's mental health as well. There is support for housing for women who may have to leave their homes due to domestic abuse. And I don't know if it exists, but there are upskilling opportunities through different organisations. But Kushala UK is very actively working to establish some form of enterprise where we can help them to get into work straight away. Because financial control is one of the major reasons that women will not get out of a situation like this. But I also want to point out that I was always a financially independent woman. It still took me 11 years to get out.
Wow.
And I was seriously suicidal at that point when I did get out. And before that, 15 years before that, I was seriously suicidal. I did make an attempt. I was 21 years old. That was down to honor-based abuse. But then again, are we giving our women enough understanding? And I insist on women because our women are more than likely victims. And I'm not saying that men understand what they're doing to their women. I don't see men as the problem. I see the whole system as a problem because men have their own struggles. They have a point to prove to the society. They have been brought up like that. They have to act macho. They have to act in control. So I think men are as much as a victim as women are. It's only that women normally are at the receiving end.
Seeing what's important, my attention to you, when we talk about challenge of victims, what are the challenges that victims face of domestic abuse when seeking help within the Punjabi community or the Asian communities as a whole?
I think that is the biggest part, is that step to actually reach out to professional services. Because I feel that when you reach out to a professional service, it then makes it very, very real. And you have to get third parties involved, such as if there is criminal activity as a result of the abuse, then the police might need to get involved. If there are children involved, then it will be social services. And, you know, women feel a real sense of shame and a sense of failure of having to, you know, reach out their hands to these services. And I think that that is shame and guilt are two of the hardest emotions to process. Shame of actually sort of coming forward and admitting that they are a victim of domestic abuse, and guilt of the repercussions that it might have on the family as a result of making it things official and making them real. So I think that those are two of the biggest kind of challenges that women face. Along with what Rituji was saying, that, you know, the lack of financial stability, the lack of independence, life after being in an abusive relationship sometimes isn't visible to them. And I think that many women do genuinely feel that they're better off staying in an abusive relationship where they can predict what may will happen, than being in a situation of unpredictability and and financial instability. So I think that the work that Kaushalya UK does or envisages to do with upskilling and empowering is really, really important. And I must also mention that Kaushalya UK is often the bridge. Institutes such as Kaushalya UK are often the bridge between an ordinary person who is experiencing domestic abuse and the professional services, because that journey to leaving the family home to access help from a professional body, such as housing, such as the police, can be extremely daunting and extremely overwhelming. So actually having a friend, a support system from within the community is so important.
But you want a final word with you here, talking about how things are in the Sikh community. We've got so many women who are role models, Mata Kiwiji, Harpal Singh, just few for me coming to mind now. And we're hearing quite a lot of our mothers, sisters, daughters going through domestic abuse, especially from the Sikh community. I just want you to just get your thoughts on that.
So as I was listening to both of you and Ritu, what you were saying about a lot of the men will be in this unaware state, not even conscious of their patterns generally. And again, like the Guru talks about anajanat bhikkha mein rache, like in this unaware state, we kind of consume this poisonous way of life. So, and I do feel, again, when we talk about Gurbani and this path, if we have a deeper understanding of there's tools provided to break these patterns. You spoke about Mata Kiwiji, who's been a huge inspiration in our life, meaning myself and my wife. Well, we've tried to take that, to use that as a model for our lives, where we've created a system and a community where we serve together, so that we're empowering each other to use each other's skills to create this community to serve, but together, so that we can also break out of our old patterns and our parents, some of the things that they may have done. So that's how we're using Mata Kiviji, is very dear to us in our life.
It feels like we can talk about subject for another few hours. We are coming to the end of the show. So big thank you to Seema, Nikto, for your expert knowledge. And once again, and always heartfelt, thank you for for these words of wisdom. Domestic violence, it's happening in our environment. It's not going to go away. Don't suffer in silence. Please seek that support and help one another. Until next episode, please take care of yourself and each other. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.